And hello again from A Touch of Dutch Landscaping. I'm Johan Bossers, and this topic is going to be about wrapping and tying your plants for the winter. We usually only tie, or not tie, wrap evergreens after we plant them during the first year. After the first year, we don't really think the evergreens have to be wrapped. The reason that we wrap them the first year is that a lot of evergreens come from the west coast of Canada or the west coast of the United States, and those are not really acclimatized for our region yet. Plus, if they're growing in a nursery and they're closer together, they're not necessarily in the open like this little spruce is, where it will get a lot of cold east winds or west winds, and which will dries out the needles, and that's the reason why after the first year, after the first year growth, we wrap them with burlap. Now, we usually get a heavier burlap. You can probably find some at any of the retail stores, for sure at the garden center or any type of a co-op type store or a hardware store. If they're small like this, we usually just take the burlap, hang it over the spruce tree, just make sure it's big enough, and then just with some string tie it at the bottom. It's a fairly simple process. Once they get bigger, because sometimes they're 5 feet, 6 feet, 7 feet tall, you can either wrap horizontally the burlap around it, or you can also drape it over top and do a couple of them and tie it together. If they're bigger trees, they have sometimes stakes beside them. You can also use the stakes and go around the stakes to attach the burlap to. Makes it a little bit easier. Just make sure that all the parts are protected from the wind and from the snow, so that you don't have any dried out branches in the spring. Then if you, let's say you have a long hedge, a cedar hedge, and you have 20 plants, it becomes a lot harder to wrap every individual one. What we usually do then, we take wooden stakes and plant them, put them about 4 feet apart in the ground, and then attach the burlap on the outside to the stakes along the whole cedar hedge all the way around. That the top is open doesn't matter, as long as the burlap is at least as high as what the cedars are. And you can staple the burlap to the stakes, and you just leave it for the winter time. You can just make sure the stakes are not further than 4 feet apart. Otherwise the burlap might fall off, or there might be too much wind in there. So smaller evergreens, the boxwoods and the yews, we can do the same. Drape the burlap over top of them, put some twine around it, and they're good to go for the winter time. Then any larger plants, larger cedars, larger yews, if they're underneath the roof line of a house or a building, and you think they might receive a larger snow load, we usually tie them up just with regular twine. Start at the bottom, tie it onto a branch, and just keep going around, all the way around until you're pretty well at the top. Make sure you don't make it too tight so that there's still some air going through the plant. Then in the spring, once you are in, don't take the burlap off too early. A lot of people think, oh, the weather is nice at the end of February or early March, and have it a day like today, and they take off the burlap, and then the middle of March, end of March, we got some cold winds again, and all the work they did with preparing the plants and wrapping them for the winter time is now all waste, because the cold winds will still dry out those needles, and they will still turn brown. So I would leave it on. We usually leave it on till at least pretty well the middle of April before we take the burlap off. The twine probably can take off earlier, because we usually don't get a whole lot of snow after the 1st of April. Don't leave it on too long neither, because once it wants to start growing, you don't want to restrict it with the burlap being on top of it. And that's all there is towards wrapping and burlapping for the winter time. And as they say in Holland, bedankt en tot ziens.